He's done.
Hey guys, welcome back. Most ThunderCats fans know almost everything about the Sword of Omens. It's the weapon carried by Liono. It contains the Eye of Thundera, grants him sight beyond sight, and allows him to summon the other ThunderCats when danger approaches. More than anything else, it represents leadership, responsibility, and the protection of innocent life. Because of that, almost every discussion about the ThunderCats eventually comes back to the Sword of Omens. But there's another sword that's never received the same amount of attention. A weapon that is older, darker, and in some ways even more terrifying. The Sword of Plun-Darr. Unlike the Sword of Omens, this blade is repeatedly associated with conquest, destruction, and some of the greatest disasters in ThunderCats history. In the 2011 series, it was forged from ore left behind after Mumm-Ra destroyed the Sword of Plun-Darr and killed billions of living beings across its system. In the original 1985 continuity, the sword was ultimately responsible for the destruction of Thundera itself. That alone makes it one of the most dangerous objects in the entire franchise. But there's a much more interesting question hiding behind all this. Is the Sword of Plun-Darr actually evil? Or is it simply an extraordinarily powerful weapon that repeatedly ends up in the hands of conquerors? To answer that, we have to examine the major versions of the sword across ThunderCats history. The 2011 reboot gave us its most detailed origin story. The original 1985 series showed the catastrophic damage that it could cause. The 2011 episodes, involving Ratilla and Rataro, explored why rulers continued seeking it. Modern comics have also returned to the broader idea of a destructive counterpart to the Sword of Omens, although these stories belong to another continuity. Once we separate all these versions and place the evidence side by side, one idea becomes clear. The Sword of Plun-Darr was created to represent everything that the Sword of Omens was built to oppose.
The Sword of Plun-Darr!
Two swords born from the same age. Before we understand the Sword of Plun-Darr, we need to understand the worlds in which it exists. ThunderCats has several separate continuities. The original animated series began in 1985. The darker reboot arrived in 2011. ThunderCats Roar created another version in 2020, while Dynamite Entertainment began a new comic continuity in 2024. These stories reuse names, characters, weapons, and basic themes, but their histories are not always compatible. That distinction is especially important when discussing Mumm-Ra and the two swords. Across most versions, Mumm-Ra is more than an ordinary ruler trying to conquer one kingdom. He's an ancient sorcerer empowered by the ancient spirits of evil. He wants control over Thundera, Third Earth, and eventually much more of the universe. The ancient spirits grant him supernatural power and transform his decayed body into Mumm-Ra the Ever-Living. However, the detailed connection between Mumm-Ra and the Sword of Plun-Darr differs between continuities. In the 2011 series, Mumm-Ra personally orders the sword's creation as part of his search for the Power Stone. In the classic cartoon, the weapon's origin is less clearly explained, and it becomes connected to Ratilla, Jaga, the destruction of Thundera, and Mumm-Ra's later attempts to reclaim it. So the sword is not always born through the exact same events. What remains consistent is its symbolic role. The Sword of Omens is associated with the ThunderCats, leadership, unity, and protection. The Sword of Plun-Darr is associated with Mumm-Ra, Ratilla, Rataro, conquest, and destruction. They're not merely two powerful swords that happen to exist in the same mythology. They function as ideological opposites. One is carried by those attempting to protect a kingdom. The other is repeatedly sought by those attempting to dominate one. Nowhere is that opposition shown more clearly than in the 2011 episode, Birth of the Blades. The birth of the Sword of Plun-Darr. The most detailed origin of the Sword of Plun-Darr appears in the 2011 ThunderCats reboot. The story is revealed in episode 21, Birth of the Blades. Long before Liono's lifetime, Mumm-Ra commanded an enormous interstellar empire. Different animal species served beneath him, while Leo, Liono's ancestor, held an important position in his forces. Mumm-Ra was searching for the Power Stones, including the War Stone that would eventually become known as the Eye of Thundera. He needed a weapon capable of channeling their energy. The ancient spirits of evil told him that the necessary material could be found within the Star of Plun-Darr. Harvesting it would require the star to be destroyed. Mumm-Ra accepted the cost. The star collapsed, devastating the surrounding system and killing billions. The episode presents this destruction as an atrocity committed for one purpose. Mumm-Ra wanted enough rare ore to create a weapon. After the star was destroyed, the surviving material was gathered. The ancient spirits of evil possessed a blacksmith and used his body to forge the Sword of Plun-Darr. That detail's important. The blade was not an ordinary sword that became corrupted years later. Its creation was directed by the ancient spirits of evil. Its material was obtained through mass death. Its purpose was to channel power for an imperial conqueror. From its first moment of existence, it was connected to domination. However, the same destruction also helped create the weapon that would oppose it. Leo became increasingly horrified by Mum-Ra's methods. Panthera, Leo's second-in-command and partner, had already encouraged him to rebel against Mum-Ra. Using fragments of the ore discarded through the Sword of Plun-Darr's creation, Leo secretly commissioned another blade. That weapon became the Sword of Omens. The two swords therefore came from the same destroyed star and the same rare material, but they were created for completely different reasons. The Sword of Plun-Darr was built to strengthen Mum-Ra's empire. The Sword of Omens was created to help Leo's rebellion overthrow it. This is what makes their relationship so fascinating. The difference between them does not come primarily from the ore. The difference comes from the intentions of the people who created and used them. One sword was created after billions were sacrificed for power. The other was created from what remained by people attempting to oppose tyranny. They are twin weapons because of their common origin, but from the beginning they were pointed in opposite moral directions. The sword that refused to stay buried. The original 1985 ThunderCats series gives the Sword of Plun-Darr a different history. The classic version does not contain the same story about Mum-Ra destroying the Star of Plun-Darr to forge two sibling blades. Instead, the sword's history is revealed through the Thundercubs storyline. Long before Liono became Lord of the ThunderCats, the Sword of Plun-Darr belonged to a mutant warlord named Ratilla. Ratilla attempted to steal the treasure of Thundera. Jaga confronted and defeated him using the Sword of Omens. After taking the Sword of Plun-Darr, Jaga faced a difficult problem. He did not want to keep such a dangerous weapon. Rather than use it or store it among the Thunderian treasures, he cast it into the deepest canyon on Thundera. The sword fell through the planet and became trapped near its molten core. Jaga believed that had removed the threat. Instead, the decision created an even larger catastrophe. According to the classic story, the sword continued struggling to free itself. Its violent energy destabilized Thundera from within. Over time, that disturbance produced the chain reaction that caused the planet to explode. This revelation changes the entire beginning of the original cartoon. The ThunderCats were forced to abandon Thundera because the planet was dying. Their fleet was attacked. Jaga sacrificed his life, guiding them towards Third Earth. Liono awakened after years of suspended animation and had to build a new home. All of these events can ultimately be traced back to the Sword of Plun-Darr. What makes this version so terrifying is that the sword did not require a wielder to destroy a planet. It remained buried inside Thundera. Yet its attempts to escape were powerful enough to tear the world apart. The episode uses language suggesting that the sword actively fought against its imprisonment. That doesn't give us a complete explanation of whether it possessed intelligence, but it does show us that this was not an inert piece of metal. The weapon carried power capable of acting upon the environment around it. Many legendary weapons become dangerous only when someone swings them. The classic Sword of Plun-Darr was dangerous simply because it existed.
Until my ancestor, Ratilla, made a discovery that changed our destiny forever.
Ratilla, Rataro, and the Curse of Mount Plun-Darr. The 2011 reboot reimagines Ratilla and connects him to the sword in a different way. After Mum-Ra's ancient defeat, the Sword of Plun-Darr was lost on Third Earth. Generations later, Ratilla discovered it in the swamplands. Ratilla used the weapon's destructive power to become a despot and led his rat forces into war against Thundera. He did not serve Mum-Ra in the same way that Mum-Ra served the ancient spirits of evil. Ratilla's motivation was political and military domination. He wanted his people to rise through conquest. The sword gave him the power to attempt it. The Thunderian king eventually entrusted Jaga with the Sword of Omens. Jaga defeated Ratilla in another confrontation between the two blades. Once again, Jaga refused to keep the Sword of Plun-Darr, but this time, rather than throwing it into a canyon, he placed a magical curse around it and buried it deep underground. A mountain rose around the site and became known as Mount Plun-Darr. Jaga's curse was intended to stop anyone from recovering the weapon. The mines surrounding it became deadly. Thunderian slaves forced to excavate the mountain encountered cave-ins, supernatural resistance, and fatal dangers. This gives the curse an unusual purpose. Most fantasy curses are placed on treasure to punish thieves or protect the treasure's owner. Jaga's curse protected the world from the treasure. He was not preserving the sword for a future hero. He was trying to make sure nobody could use it ever again. Years later, Ratilla's descendant, Rataro, became obsessed with recovering it. Rataro enslaved Thunderian refugees and forced them to dig through Mount Plun-Darr. He believed the sword would restore the Rat Kingdom's power and allow him to dominate his enemies. This raises the central question again. Did the Sword of Plun-Darr make Ratilla and Rataro evil? The series gives us no clear evidence that the sword gradually corrupted either man. Ratilla was already an aggressive warlord when he used it. Rataro was already enslaving people before he recovered it. Neither begins as a kind ruler who becomes twisted after touching the blade. The sword appears to amplify existing ambition rather than manufacture it. It offers enormous power to anyone willing to take it. The type of person most likely to seek such power is already dangerous. That makes the Sword of Plun-Darr different from objects such as the One Ring. The story never clearly shows it whispering into an innocent person's mind or gradually destroying a good person's personality. Instead, its reputation attracts conquerors. It does not need to create their hunger for control. It gives that hunger a weapon.
Ratilla fought for the fate of our people.
Two twin blades with very different purposes. In the 2011 continuity, the Sword of Omens and Sword of Plun-Darr are literally sibling blades. Both were forged from ore left behind by the destruction of the Star of Plun-Darr. Both were designed to channel extraordinary power, yet their histories immediately moved into opposite directions. Mum-Ra created the Sword of Plun-Darr because he wanted control over the Power Stones and the empire that they could help him maintain. Billions died so he could possess it. Leo created the Sword of Omens because he had turned against that empire. He wanted to free the species Mum-Ra had enslaved and take away the Power Stones that supported his rule. The difference between the weapons is therefore not the substance from which they were made, it's the purpose placed inside their creation. The Sword of Omens became associated with the Lord of the ThunderCats and the Eye of Thundera. It was passed through Thunderian history as both a weapon and a symbol of authority. Liono uses it to call the ThunderCats together, seeing beyond ordinary sight and channeling the power of the Eye. However, we should be careful about claiming that the sword automatically accepts only morally perfect champions. The franchise does not consistently present it as a weapon with one simple worthiness test. Its power can fail, resist interference, or respond differently depending on the story. But it is fundamentally tied to Thunderian leadership and the responsibility to protect others. The Sword of Plun-Darr follows the opposite path. It becomes associated with Mum-Ra's empire, Ratilla's war, Rataro's ambition, and catastrophic destruction. Its major wielders do not see power as a responsibility. They see power as proof that they deserve to rule. The Sword of Omens serves rulers who are supposed to protect their people. The Sword of Plun-Darr serves those who want people beneath them. Even in the classic continuity, the contrast remains. The Sword of Omens survives the destruction of Thundera and helps the ThunderCats establish a future on Third Earth. The Sword of Plun-Darr is revealed as the object that helped destroy their original home. One becomes part of the rebuilding, the other leaves ruins behind. The modern comics and the idea of a dark reflection. The modern Dynamite ThunderCat comics takes place in another continuity. They shouldn't be treated as direct sequels to either the 1985 series or the 2011 reboot. In the 2024 series, readers were introduced to a mysterious warrior known as Apex. Apex wields a massive axe rather than the Sword of Plun-Darr. The weapon is immensely destructive and visually functions as a threatening counterpart to Liono and the Sword of Omens. Apex's arrival is connected to major destruction involving the ThunderCats' home and forces Liono to face a warrior who knows far more about the ThunderCats than expected. However, the comics do not establish that Apex's axe is the new Sword of Plun-Darr. It's not confirmed as a transformed version of the sword. It's not confirmed to share its magical origin, and it should not be treated as a direct successor unless the comic explicitly reveals that connection. What the axe does continue is the broader visual pattern. ThunderCats stories often place Liono's symbol of heroic authority against an equally overwhelming weapon associated with anger, destruction, or conquest. Sometimes that dark reflection is literally the Sword of Plun-Darr. In the Dynamite continuity, Apex's axe creates a similar dramatic image without necessarily sharing the older weapon's history. The shape changes, the symbolism remains familiar. Liono's blade represents the future he's trying to build. The opposing weapon represents the force trying to tear that future apart. Liono's greatest choice. Birth of the Blades eventually brings the Sword of Omens and the Sword of Plun-Darr together in the present day. After Rataro is defeated, the ThunderCats recover the Sword of Plun-Darr from Mount Plun-Darr. Before they can hide it, Mum-Ra arrives with his forces. Liono and Pumaira carry the sword deeper into the mines, hoping to draw Mum-Ra away from the freed Thunderian slaves. However, Mum-Ra has a connection to the blade and can track its location. He eventually captures Pumaira and recovers the Sword of Plun-Darr. Liono confronts him with the Sword of Omens. For the first time in the modern story, the blades clash in the hands of their opposing champions. Liono gains an advantage during the battle, but Mumm-Ra creates an impossible choice. Liono can attempt to stop him from escaping with the Sword of Plun-Darr, or he can save Pumira. He cannot do both. Liono chooses Pumira. That decision does not mean he casually throws away the chance to own the Sword of Plun-Darr. The weapon is already within Mumm-Ra's reach. Liono's real choice is between preventing Mumm-Ra from reclaiming it and saving another person's life. He chooses life. The contrast with Mumm-Ra is unmistakable. Mumm-Ra destroyed billions to create one weapon. Liono allows that weapon to escape because he refuses to sacrifice one person to stop it. That's why the episode matters. It's not merely showing us which sword fires the larger blast. It's showing us what their wielders believe power is for. Mumm-Ra treats lives as resources that can be exchanged for power. Liono treats power as something that should be risked in order to save lives. The moral difference between the two swords becomes visible through the decisions of the people holding. How evil is the Sword of Plun-Darr, really? After examining the major versions of the Sword of Plun-Darr, we can finally return to the question that started this video. How evil is it really? The answer depends partly on the continuity. In the classic series, the sword behaves almost like an active destructive force. It fights against its imprisonment inside Thundera and destabilizes the entire planet. That version appears to possess dangerous energy beyond the intentions of whoever carries it. In the 2011 series, the case is slightly different. The sword was created through mass destruction under the direction of the ancient spirits of evil. It was built for Mumm-Ra and designed to channel the Power Stone. Its origin, purpose, and magical connection are all associated with conquest. That gives the blade an inherently evil history, but the series doesn't clearly establish that it automatically transforms innocent people into villain. Rataro wanted domination. Mumm-Ra wanted domination. They were already dangerous before they possessed the sword. The blade did not need to invent their ambitions. It simply gave them the power to pursue those ambitions on a much larger scale. In that sense, the Sword of Plun-Darr works both as a weapon and a temptation. Its existence promises overwhelming power. The people who pursue it are generally those willing to hurt others in order to obtain that power. The Sword of Plun-Darr may not whisper into their minds. Its reputation is enough. The most fascinating part of the 2011 story is that the Sword of Omens came from the same destroyed star. The same ore helped build both blades. One became a symbol of liberation. The other became a symbol of conquest. That tells us that the material itself was not destiny. The hands that shaped it mattered. The purpose behind its creation mattered. The people who would later choose to wield the sword mattered. The Star of Plun-Darr gave the world two weapons. One was created from an atrocity to preserve an empire. The other was created from the remains of that atrocity to overthrow that empire. That's why the Sword of Plun-Darr remains one of the most fascinating weapons in ThunderCats history. It's not merely the Sword of Omens painted in darker colors. It represents the opposite belief of power. The Sword of Omens asks how power can protect people. The Sword of Plun-Darr repeatedly appears in the hands of those asking how power can control them. And perhaps that's the clearest answer of all. The Sword of Plun-Darr is evil because of what created it, what it was designed to accomplish, and the kinds of rulers who repeatedly seek it out. Its metal may have had the potential to become anything. Its purpose turned into a weapon of fear. That's all for this video. We'll see you guys in the next one. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to our channel, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss any more ThunderCats content. Be safe. Have a great day.